Now, I know that Game Week 13 isn't even over yet, but if you know me, you know that doesn't stop me making some FPL content. And in this video, I'm going to go through players to buy and avoid ahead of Game Week 14. So first up, I'm going to take you through a model, like I do in most of these buy and avoid videos, from 11FI. And what we've got here is a projection of upcoming clean sheet odds for the next, 5 game weeks, 14 to 18. Now, Arsenal come out on top and, they look by far and away the best defence. I've gone through the Arsenal defence in like the last 2 or 3 of the videos of this type that I've made. So I don't want to spend too long focusing on the Arsenal defence because they haven't played in Game Week 13 at the time that I'm recording this video. But I think regardless of how they actually get on in Game Week 13, I don't think anyone can deny that they're looking good defensively again. And also just a good option going forwards, right? I would say my standout two are probably Timber. I think, he's a decent value, 5.5 million. Might go up in some time. But with Ben White being injured, unless he gets injured in the game in Game Week 13, and then obviously you're going to have to change your opinion. But with White being injured, I think he's going to play most of the games. And I would say, I would doubt his ability to play 90 in all of the games. But I actually think that would serve to benefit him in the sense that he could actually claim some clean sheets early by being subbed before 90 minutes. Just a thought on him. And Gabriel as well. I'd go for Gabriel. I think Saliba's a perfectly decent shout. But I think if you don't want to go for Gabriel, you might as well save the money and go for Timber. And then Gabriel's probably the best because he's the most attacking, or at least offers the most goal threat. And then Saliba's probably the third best. Raya in goal is a great option. But I'll talk in a second about who I actually think are the best goalkeepers in the game. City, Man City in second. Would you touch the Man City defence at the moment? I definitely wouldn't. Liverpool in third. They've obviously been, I think, still statistically the best defence in the league so far this season. But with Konate being injured, I could actually open up Joe Gomez as an option, to be fair, or maybe Kwanzaa. I think it'd probably be Gomez that replaces Konate. But I don't know, they got a couple of tough fixtures mixed in there. The team that I really wanted to talk about is Brighton. So they rank 4th on this clean sheet odds list. And I don't think it's any surprise to see Arsenal, Man City and Liverpool up there. We all know there's a kind of the best defences in the league, right? But I think Brighton ranking up there is quite interesting. And for me, there's a couple of options I would really consider from the Brighton defence. First up is Lewis Dunk. Now, he only came off the bench in Game Week 13. So I'd say you probably want slightly more assurances that he's definitely going to play in 14. But what I like about Lewis Dunk, particularly over the really crazy, busy, festive period, is you can guarantee, as long as he's fit, that he's just going to play every game. I think there are lots of players at this price point that have decent fixtures, look promising, but you cannot guarantee they're going to play every game. I think of the likes of, Lewis Hall, Nori, who's on 4 yellow cards, for example. Other players around this price point that are obviously good, might be game by game actually better, but carry with them a bit of risk. Whereas Lewis Dunk at 4.4 million, I think he's just going to play every game. And I know he hasn't actually scored a goal yet, but he always looks dangerous from set pieces. And I think it's only a matter of time before he nets one. The Brighton fixtures for the next 5 game weeks at least look really good from a defensive perspective. Fulham, Leicester, Palace, West Ham, Brentford. I think Brighton have one of the best runs in the whole league for the next 5 fixtures. So I definitely think Lewis Dunk is a nice option to bring in from a defensive perspective. And I also don't mind Verbruggen in goal either. He's got 3.55 saves per 90. I'm not going to go through what I think about goalkeepers making saves and keeping clean sheets, but you guys probably remember what I say in all of my videos about that. I think if you're sitting on Flecken, which I currently am, and had enough of him, we got our clean sheet in Game Week 12. He didn't keep one in 13, of course. I think if you have an issue in terms of money, as in you can't upgrade Flecken to someone else, I think Verbruggen's probably the next best thing. 4.5 million, obviously has those good defensive fixtures like Lewis Dunk does. I know he's only kept 2 clean sheets from 11 games, but yeah, I think those fixtures coming up look good. And I would definitely say, in my opinion, that Brighton are better defensively than Brentford are. And the fact that he's made 3.55 saves per 90 suggests to me, he's pretty good for saves bonus as well. So he's got a chance of clean sheets and saves, which I really like from goalkeepers. I think you need the 2. I'm not going to go through that in any more detail because people have been going at me in the comments for that. So yeah, I think he's a good option. And I'd say the combination of Dunk and Verbruggen are pretty decent buys, I think, for Game Week 14 and onwards. I just wanted to pick out Onana and Pickford as well, just for a little segment, because you're looking at the fixture that they're about to play this week. And the two of them, if we're looking in the future at Game Week 14 onwards, they've got tough fixtures coming up, right? But with just the nature of where their points will come from, for me, I would just pick these guys and start them against absolutely anyone, because they'll either get a decent amount of saves or keep a clean sheet. I think that's probably what they'll end up doing. And they're just, in my opinion, is what I've spoken about them. I just spoke about Verbruggen as probably the best replacement for Flecken around the price point. But I think these two will probably finish, as the top scoring goalkeepers come the end of the season. So pick one, stick with them for the season, ride out the tough games, and I think they'll reward you nicely with some points. So yeah, I just wanted to make a point about Onana and Pickford. All right, so we've gone through the clean sheet odds and the defences. Next up, we've got the projected goals. So similar model from 11-5. By the way, I'll leave a link to 11-5 in the description below. But this is for how many goals each team is going to score. And I've got to say, you look at this list, and there aren't really any surprises as such. The best teams in the league are projected to score the most goals, basically. I wish there was something I could draw from this. There isn't really. The best teams in the league are back to score the most goals. Everton there, bottom. I'd suggest if you're still holding on to someone like Calvert-Lewin, definitely time to sell him if you haven't already. Ipswich, Southampton, Leicester, and interestingly, Crystal Palace at the bottom as well, towards the bottom as well. Got Forest towards the bottom, Fulham and Wolves as well, and then top half it goes from there, basically, doesn't it? Basically, I know there's not much news from here, other than basically saying these top teams, they're back to score the most goals over the next week. So maybe owning players from some of these top teams is going to be the way to go going forwards. And I just wanted to take a look at the Fantasy Football Hub expected points for the next 5 game weeks. So what I've got here is expected points from game week 14 to 18, just to give you an idea of who the top players in the game are. Interestingly, this is the first time it's happened this season, particularly over a 5 game week period. We see Salah overtaking Haaland in terms of expected points. So, Haaland, I think he's actually down to around 50% ownership now. Quite a lot of people have sold him since I did this graphic. That suggests, of course, that Salah's a better option. And you look week on week, apart from game week 16, Salah is above him for expected points. And even in game week 16, it looks like Salah's got Fulham, right? So even that is a time where you could potentially captain Salah. So it's certainly looking, and including the expected points, that Salah is a better option in the game than Haaland at the moment. Do I believe that? Well, I've got Haaland in my team right now. I've refused to sell him, and I believe in him. I think he can come back with some goals and be worth his price point. And, the idea of having Erling Haaland is not a differential, right? 'Cause he's still owned by half the game, but possibly a differential among properly engaged managers. I think that's a good place to be. Palmer and Saka in 3rd and 4th. Those are the big 4 in the game, right? Haaland, Salah, Palmer, and Saka. And they're expected to score the most points, basically. And I guess this is suggesting, the expected points at least are suggesting, that the best, you can only realistically have 3 of those 4 players. I don't think anyone has got Saka, Palmer, Haaland, and Salah. Let me know in the comments if you do, and then has a reasonable rest of their team. I think you really have to make sacrifices elsewhere to get all 4 in. And it suggests to me, looking at these expected points, the best trio is Salah, Palmer, and Saka, right? Isak's on this list. Did unfortunately pick up an injury against Crystal Palace in game week 13. So any managers that bought Isak ahead of game week 13, you're really unlucky. What can you do? I think the only thing I can say there is Isak is a player that is fairly injury prone. And I guess when you buy him, you run the risk of him getting injured, basically. Although I would say the alternative to Isak, if you were looking around that price point, is Nicholas Jackson, who was on 4 yellow cards as well. So both players had their own downsides. I think if you're an Isak owner, you consider yourself a bit unlucky there. Then you got Son, and interestingly, Cunha is amongst the top expected points players for the next 5. I don't have a whole lot to say about João Pedro other than this is a safe place for João Pedro owners or buyers ahead of game week 13. I think we can consider ourselves quite unlucky, really. I mean, all the data, everything suggested that he was set up to have a pretty decent game against Southampton in game week 13. And obviously, it just didn't come to fruition. Didn't get an attack in return, got subbed off early. What can you do? I mean, I definitely wouldn't be knee-jerking him out of my team. We spoke about this when we we're going through the Brighton defenders, but the Brighton fixtures look excellent coming up. Fulham, Leicester, Palace, West Ham, Brentford. Those are all games in my mind where João Pedro could score. He's got 6 attacking returns from 7 starts. You can see there he's actually got the defensive stats on him, but doesn't matter. He's also on penalties as well. So all of that just suggests he's still going to be a really good option. So I just wanted to have this safe space for any João Pedro owners out there, and also say I definitely won't be selling him. One interesting point of conversation I wanted to make on this video, and I spoke about it a little bit on my deadline stream, and I got a bit ripped into in the chat for it. I was basically saying, I was a bit stronger than this to be fair, I might have used the word overrated, but I was basically saying I don't think Cunha can keep up the current level of returns that he's been managing this season. You think back to the goals, those 7 goals that he scored, half of them have genuinely been screamers from outside the box. Now, obviously it takes skill in prowess to do that, but I don't think it's sustainable, and obviously he blanked in game week 13, I'm not going to. You know, any player can blank in any week, right? I'm not going to say that one blank would put me off Cunha as an option. But I think it kind of backs up the point that those, you know, the level of returns that he was getting, particularly scoring from outside the box, wasn't necessarily sustainable. And you've got Strand Larsen, who sits at 1.5 million cheaper than him in the game, who is putting up pretty similar numbers. So he's got 8 attacking returns from 13 appearances. Cunha's got 10. It's not a whole lot of difference. And I'd actually say Strand Larsen, to me at least, appears to be slightly the more like focal point of the Wolves attack. He's actually playing as the number 9, whereas obviously Cunha's coming in off the left. So yeah, I just wanted to make that comparison basically because I have a decision to make coming into Game Week 14. I think I have to buy one of these players. And I'm almost considering going for Strand Larsen instead of Cunha because, well, I think he saves you 1.5 million, maybe even more depending on how price rises go over the next couple of days. It saves you 1.5 million and offers you a very similar level of returns. So yeah, just something to bear in mind. I thought it'd be useful to show that comparison. Safe to say, I think, that Bryan Mbeumo has been pretty disappointing in recent game weeks. I think over the last 4 or 5 game weeks, he's put up less than 0.1 expected goals, which is really poor considering how he started his season. Brentford obviously scored 4 goals in game week 13 and he wasn't involved in a single one of them. So yeah, what can you do? And there is definitely, I think, an argument to potentially sell him. You know, that level of XG he's put up over the recent game weeks. The fixtures he's got coming up are pretty tough. Villa, Newcastle, Chelsea, Forest. All 4 of those teams can be pretty solid defensively. And then Brighton as well, who I've personally backed from a defensive perspective. So those are tough fixtures against good teams. Well, maybe Newcastle, maybe, oh yeah, I guess Newcastle, probably the weaker of those 5 actually. So yeah, the fixtures get tough for him, and he's not been returning in recent game weeks. So I think there is definitely a case to sell him, right? There is definitely a case to sell him. But I also think on the flip side, there's a case to keep hold of him, right? Brentford have just scored 4 goals in game week 13, right? That suggests, and across the whole season, they've, in my opinion, been one of the best attacks in the league. And I think it's only a matter of time before Bryan Mbeumo gets amongst the goals again. I really do. And I'm looking at the fixtures he's got coming up. And yes, on the face of it, they look challenging. But are they actually? Aston Villa have not been the most solid defence in the league. I would expect Brentford to score in that game. I look at Newcastle. They've not been all that good this season. And I'd expect, particularly at home, Brentford to be able to score in that one. Chelsea, relatively tough fixture. But again, they've not been absolutely rock solid defensively. So Brentford could score there. Forest will be a tough game, but at the Brentford Stadium, they've been really good at home. I think they could score in that one. And Brighton away, I think they could score as well. So, you know, there's a couple of arguments there. Yes, the fixtures do get tough for Bryan Mbeumo, but on the flip side, he's still a good player. Yes, he's not been in the best form for the last 3 or 4 fixtures, but I'd back in and turn that around based on his performances over the last couple of seasons. And I think there's 2 narratives you could put on those fixtures. Yes, they do get tough, but really, I really think about it. And I still feel like Brentford can score in those games. Particularly, obviously, that means Bryan Mbeumo can return as well. So, yeah, he's definitely a potential sell. But I'd also bear in mind, you know, those fixtures aren't as bad as they might appear. He's still a good player, so you could keep him as well. Another player that there's a really tricky decision for is Chris Wood. 13 appearances, 9 goals this season. Scored again against Ipswich in game week 13. I've had him pretty much all season, and he's been an absolute legend for me and my team. Starts every game. Well, I say every game. Didn't start in game week 12, did he? But you know what I mean. Pretty nailed on to start every game. I think the only reason he didn't start against Arsenal was the international break. And I have a feeling that Nuno didn't necessarily throw the game, but he didn't expect to win it. And I think for that reason, he probably spared Chris Wood for that Ipswich game, that he knew he probably stood a better chance of winning. It's just my opinion. And obviously he scored as well, so kind of decision paid off for him there, really. The thing is with Chris Wood, right, I've seen a lot of people eyeing him up for a sell. And you can see why, right? Man City, Man United, Villa in his next 3. And then you look at those Wolves players, you know, who are really easy hop-ons. Everton, West Ham, Ipswich in the next 3. But think about it, right? Chris Wood has been really good this season. 9 goals from 13 appearances. Man City have lost, well, well, they lost 5 games in a row, drew at the last minute in the Champions League. They look all over the place at the moment. Yes, I guess I'll wait and see how they get on against Liverpool. But if they look woeful again against Liverpool, I wouldn't be worried about starting Chris Wood there. Man United, under their new manager, looking a little bit better, but they're definitely not rock solid defensively, right? And he could easily score in that game. And then against Aston Villa, Brentford and Tottenham, I think he could score in those games as well. Genuinely do. The 2 teams that I would be worried about if there were, imagining fixtures in there, would be the Liverpool and Arsenal. If they had both of those in those next 5, then I would be a little bit worried. Obviously, they've gotten through the Arsenal game now. But yeah, I think the narrative around Chris Wood and Nottingham Forest is that the fixtures turn, which I guess from a defensive perspective they do. If you've got Nottingham Forest defenders in those next 5 fixtures, I'd be a little bit worried. I do think they could concede, but I do think they could score. I genuinely think they're not as tough as those fixtures aren't as tough as they might appear for Forest scoring goals. So yeah, there definitely is a case for selling him, but I also think you could keep him as well. I know I'm kind of sitting on the fence here, but that's the whole idea of this channel, really, is just to put ideas in people's heads, I guess, basically. For me, I'm going to find it really hard to get rid of Chris Wood. He's been reliable this season. He's on penalties. He's fit, looks ready, on form, still on form, obviously, after returning from the international break. And those fixtures, I don't think, are as tough as they might appear. So it's going to be a tough old call to sell Chris Wood, I think. All right, that's the end of the video. Thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed it, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave me a like rating. Let me know in the comments what you think of those players I've mentioned there, whether you agree or disagree. Well, you can't really agree or disagree with what I said about Mbeumo or Chris Wood there. I basically wanted to say, I get that there's a narrative around the 2 of them. The fixtures turn and people are considering selling them. There's obviously justification to do so, but I also think I wouldn't be too knee-jerky and getting rid of them because they're 2 reliable players that have been playing well this season. And I think they will score over those games. It's just a matter of, do you believe someone else could outscore them? And those kind of luxury transfers, case in point, I made one this week. I did Raul Jimenez to João Pedro. Those kind of luxury transfers where you've got, 2 players who are going to play all the games. Fixtures might be different for each of them. And then you swap them around because you think one is going to score more points than the other. Those just always seem to backfire on me. And it might well do this week. So I sold Raul Jimenez for João Pedro. Obviously, Jimenez hasn't played yet this week. If Jimenez scores, well, that's pie on my face, isn't it? I'm in trouble then. And that's the kind of narrative, that's the kind of decision I think most people are going to have to make around Chris Wood and Bryan Mbeumo. So a lot of people are probably going to be selling Chris Wood for one of the Wolves strikers. Bryan Mbeumo, potentially, I guess, to Odegaard, Bruno Fernandes, something like that. Maybe someone cheaper. I'd bear that kind of luxury transfer thought in mind. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. By the way, if you haven't already, subscribe, go on the Goal channel. Should be just there on your screen. If you enjoyed this video and haven't already, I'd really appreciate that. All right, I'll catch you in my next video.